Hello and welcome to our video. This is a video that helps you tackle interview questions for college entrance exams. I'm sure that all of you are eager to learn more about how you can sit in at an exam and answer those questions in a educated, professional, and in a comfortable manner. So before we begin, let's just briefly introduce ourselves. My name is Matthew Park. I am a class of 11 at Underwood International College, Yonsei University, and I've just recently graduated and I'm continuing my studies at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Sitting next to me is Soy.
My name is Soy Moon, and I also graduated from Underwood International College at Yonsei University. And why don't we dive right in?
Okay, so let's start with question number one. Question number one asks you to answer some main or major differences between realism and liberalism, which you would already be familiar with are one of the two main paradigms in the international relations theory. So, and it also asks you to answer according to excerpt A. So I would ask you again to read through excerpt A very carefully and try to answer the question and try to figure out the differences mainly from that excerpt. So now that I have given you a brief introduction or an examination of what the question asks you to do, I think I would hand it over to Soy to elucidate a little bit more.
All right, thank you, Matthew. In question one, we're going to be, again, looking only at excerpt A. And in excerpt A, it's very helpful for us because it gives a very, let's say, objective view of the two ideologies. So first, talking about liberalism. Liberalism is mentioned in the second paragraph, as you can see here. And we are talking about the key interests in realist theories, which are power, self-interest, and the balance of power. And these are the things that are helping to maintain peace on an international level. And it actually originates from the Greek historian Thucydides, who believed that war would only start because of an imbalance of power. So you can see how this original thought might have held true at the time. But one of the pessimistic views of realism is that realists view human nature as selfish, which is very different from the idea of liberalism. So let's move on to the third paragraph. In liberalism, we are talking about a more, let's say, optimistic view, as in humans are able to cooperate with one another. And through this cooperation, we can maintain peace. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. And through this cooperation, we can maintain international institutions, for instance, where we will have many different state actors instead of having just one state actor like we had in realism. And Matthew, do you have anything to say about that?
Thank you. So I think so you just mentioned some of the very important keywords in understanding both realism and liberalism. So one of it was human nature, right? Realists view human nature as intrinsically selfish and interested in only itself. Liberalists have a more optimistic view of it itself in thinking that the nature of mankind is more benevolent. So a trick when thinking about these kind of similarities or different types of questions is that you have to pay attention to sentence structures or expressions that seem to repeat itself. So what I'm talking about in specific is, for instance, if you look at the second paragraph, say the second line from the top, it says that humans are essentially selfish. And if you go down to the third paragraph, you would also see a very similar line that says human nature is essentially good. That's the second line from the bottom. So human nature in realism is essentially selfish, and human nature in liberalism is essentially good. So these repetitions, of course, are not simply here for no reason. They are here to signify a key difference between the two ideologies. Similarly, you can see that when describing realism, the author uses that for realists, state actors are the only agents. In the liberalist description, we see that both state actors and non-state actors are key. So again, these kind of repetitions, but slightly different forms of descriptions show, and it also tells us that realism and liberalism differs in these key areas. So I think question number 1 has been tackled in a quite succinct manner. So we'll move on to question number 2, which asks you to read this underlined sentence. They still require leadership of great powers, and we are meant to answer the question by either supporting or negating this statement. So I think we need to go over briefly about what this underlying statement really means. So it says they still require the leadership of great powers. We know what require means, we know what leadership means. By great powers here, the author is trying to talk about great nations or nations with lots of power, but we still don't know what they means. It's rather abrupt. So I think we have to go back to the underlying statement in excerpt B and try to read between the lines what it says before the statement and what after the sentence. So it says, but such institutions are rarely self-sufficient, and then they still require the leadership of great power. So now we know that by they, the author means institutions and international institutions to be more correct. So what do you think what do you think the author means when he says the great institution still require the leadership of great powers?
Well, I think that these great powers are referring to the state actors that we mentioned earlier in the idea of realism, because even though this idea of international cooperation involves mostly liberalist values, you still need to consider that different nations are still their own entities. And as long as these entities are not able to cooperate, we cannot maintain this sort of international institution. So you can tell that in excerpt B, the author is sort of inferring or implicating that these international institutions cannot exist on their own. That's why they're saying they still require these great powers. And the next sentence says, and it remains to be seen whether this century's great powers will live up to this role. And by this, he's basically implying, oh, we have not seen the success or the complete success of international powers just yet. So moving on to question number 3, it says, read the underlined sentence in excerpt C. So we move on to the last one. Explain the dilemma from the views of realists and liberalists and make your own argument concerning this issue. So in excerpt C, we can read that the sentence says, indeed, the main dilemma that the international community faces is how to include everyone and still be able to act. So this dilemma, we can approach it from the view of realists and from the view of liberalists. So the dilemma is very similar to what we were talking about in question 2. How can we, let's say, balance the two ideologies? Because that's what we're basically doing in the modern world. So here we talk about international community. International community will be the, I guess, the greater group or the community made up of the state actors that we have mentioned beforehand. And it says how to include everyone and still be able to act. Essentially, yes, everyone will be included, but everyone has different interests. And everyone, as in state actors, each state actor will want to work in its own self-interest. And in the end, we are aiming to have the international institution make a decision for the entire world, for the entire group. So from the view of the realist, we could say that it's almost impossible to have an international institution successfully and sustainably make decisions and be able to implement policies. What do you think of the liberalist view?
Right. So the key here is that there is a dilemma, and you must understand what the dilemma is succinctly. And for me, I mean, to speak from the liberalist view, the dilemma here is that you have to include everyone. And we have already seen from while answering the previous questions that in the liberalist view, by everyone, we don't merely mean state actors. There are both state and non-state actors involved here. And when you want to include everyone, that is to say everyone, it's almost impossible to figure out where the boundary is. Do we mean state corporations and some important noticeable NGOs, or do we mean every individual living in the whole planet? Why, you can easily tell why this is almost infeasible while being ideal in the liberal perspective. So there's a new dilemma that arises when the liberalist paradigm tries to approach or implement this kind of action or policy towards forming a global institution, in that you want to include everyone, but you simply can't. So there's the dilemma that you have to tackle with if you want to understand and answer this question from the liberalist paradigm. So I think we've addressed all the 3 questions posted here. And so I think with that, we will conclude our first mock interview. Thank you for watching.